I am coming out of an experience where I think I was kind of just like reevaluating the things I had grown up with, rethinking. And honestly, I was at a spot where it's like, I don't think I had a lot of personal connection with the text. It's like I didn't know how to approach the text and really find life outside of, I didn't really know how to approach the Old Testament.
How much of the Bible have I like glazed over or skimmed over
Or discounted.
or not paid attention to because it was something that I didn't know, I didn't understand?
Hey man, you want to talk about God?
I obviously have been reading a lot of books lately.
Well, let's talk about this.
Yeah.
Because 2023, I feel like, has been like a year, at least in our friend group,
Yeah.
of like extreme resolutions.
Yes.
So people are
Extreme.
like just out of the gate, like jumping
Right.
up, signing up for half marathons,
Right.
saying we're going to work out 5 days a week,
Right.
blah, blah, blah. And we had a separate text thread with our buddy Jordan.
Yes.
And you were talking about like you were getting into reading
Yes.
more.
Yes.
And I think you said what was your goal? Like 24 books?
No. My goal is 60 books this year.
Well, originally, what was your goal?
60 books for this year.
That was this year. Okay.
Last year was 52 and I did 48.
Okay. So
So
you were
I-
short.
Yes, I was short last year.
Gotcha.
But I still read 48 more
That's
books than you.
No, I read 7. Ish.
Right.
Well, here's a question. If I've listened to a book.
No, it doesn't count.
No. It doesn't count.
It doesn't count.
So if I listen to.
For me, it doesn't count. I'll give you that. Because
Why?
Because I don't retain things that I listen to. Like, I could be listening to something, but my mind is somewhere
We talk so
completely
much
else.
that's so disrespectful.
I tune you out all the time.
That's true. Okay.
No. But I mean, it could count if you want to count that for you.
Because the way I look at it is if I'm driving,
Yeah.
it takes me 40 minutes to get here.
Yeah.
I can redeem that time
Yeah.
and listen to a book.
Yeah. Or you listen
I'm
to a
not saying
podcast.
I did not read it,
Right.
but I have read it.
No,
That's a
you've
quote
listened
from
to
Cody
it.
Jones.
Wow.
Okay. We've had this argument before.
Right.
And I was on the other side.
Mm-hmm.
But now I'm going to say, like,
Yeah, I don't
so
think it counts.
originally you said you're going to read this X amount of books.
Yes.
Jordan says, our friend, that he's going to do
Yes.
12
Yes.
up into 24.
Yes.
And I sat down with my wife like we do every
Well,
year
hold
and
on.
made.
Let me tell this story because it's better. It's better than
I
the
was telling
version
my-
you're telling.
Okay. Yep.
Okay, we were both there, but my version is gonna be better. Okay, so there was a dragon and a castle. Okay. No, so we were talking about reading, and I was talking about how I knew you guys had goals of books to read, but I had a buddy that I've been talking to, and we affectionately refer to this buddy as Drummer Matt. And Drummer Matt is actually here tonight while we're recording. Drummer Matt, can you say hello?
Hello.
And he's the internet.
He is
He's
the
the AI.
internet. Can you explain a little bit more about what Drummer Matt is doing, and then we'll go back to the story.
Okay. Well, Matt is here, because, I mean, he's a great guy.
He's a
We love
drummer.
it, and he's a phenomenal drummer.
He really is.
We play on the worship team.
Yep.
I think that was the first person, actually, when Matt came to Amplify and
Mm-hmm.
joined the team, to actually have a real connection. Would you agree? He's nodding for the who are not.
I'm a sound engineer, but we didn't have a real connection because I'm not a
No.
musician.
But like initially, I have a heart for the one.
The one.
Like I'll leave the 99
Right.
to go to the one.
I love
Matt
that for
was
you.
Matt was the one sitting in a corner, and I said, "Who's this poor
Right.
little puppy?
Right.
He looks like he needs a friend."
Yep.
Turns out he's so talented,
Right.
way better than I am musically
In general.
or general.
Yeah.
Yeah. But we've it's been awesome to get to know him, and he is here because we are not experts.
Correct.
And we talk a lot about accountability, about being able to, I don't don't know if it's like be good stewards, but like even with Kingdom Empowered, like thinking about like the information that gets put out on this platform, we want to make sure that it is accurate and that it's beneficial and not harmful. And we talk a lot. Right. And sometimes, little known fact, the things we say are not always correct.
That's accurate.
Yeah. So that was one that I did right. So Matt is here, going to be a part of the team.
Yep.
And is going to be chiming in with questions and his perspective, but also making sure that if we say something off the cuff that is not accurate, we want to be accountable for that.
Like and
we want to know.
And it's even like it's accountable, like 100%, and keeping information right. And it like can be as small as in the very first episode that we published, there was this thing of revelation versus revelations. Like, is there an S? Is there not an S? And
I think I was.
You were right. Yeah, 100%.
Yeah. Cool.
But John or Matt is over here, and he's going to be here for anything like that. Let's get the answer. Let's get it quick. Versus anything at all, he's going to have the information. And I think now we can segue back to the story because I'm really proud of John or Matt. Okay? Because at the beginning of this year, at the beginning of 2023, he asked me to be an accountability partner with him, speaking about accountability. Okay? This is real, though.
The cheesiest term
I know.
in the world.
I agree with you, but that's what he asked.
I prefer accountability buddy.
Already adding value.
Already.
Bang!
I love that. And so we've been friends before that, but we started talking a lot more. We started talking about some of his goals, mental, physical, spiritual, all these different things. And I believe that when we first talked, you had written down your goals on a piece of paper, and you had put that you wanted to read 12 books this year.
That's correct.
Right? And I basically was just like, those are rookie numbers. We need to get those numbers up.
I'm really self-conscious right now.
Yeah, I know, because I'm gonna tell your part of the story. That's why my story is better than your story. Okay. And I was like, you need to get those numbers up. And so then all of a sudden, Matt, you committed to 24, I believe, is what you committed to.
That's correct.
Right. And then we've been talking a lot. I've been pushing you. We've been giving each other book recommendations. We've been talking about the books that we're reading. And in January by itself, like the goal, if you break it down, was 2 in January. And I think you read, how many did you read in January?
I read 4.
He read 4. He read 4 in January. And so now, whether he's realized it or not, like now I've upped his goal for him to 48 books this year, a 4-month, because you've done it. And so why can't he do it again? So back to the original story of Cory.
I love you, but
and Jordan, one of our buddies, were in a text thread, and we were talking about reading. And I was reading a bunch, and we want to do this, and we needed to up our goals. And Jordan came back and said 12 books, and I said those are rookie numbers. We need to bump those numbers up. And Jordan bumped his up to 24. Cory comes in, and Cory says,
with an honest number,
Cory comes in and said, I had a goal of 5. 5 books.
That's a lot of books. Some people read no books, bro.
Right. But it was just funny.
Okay. Yeah. And then
But you've stepped your game up. You have.
In the past week since we had this conversation.
Right.
I reread What is the Bible?
Right.
And I am...
That's not true. You just lied.
Okay, so we have to...
Matt, you need to keep him accountable. You listened to it.
I listened.
You didn't read it.
And actually, you could say that I get more from listening to a book that is read by the author.
Uh-huh. Is there like commentary in it, or is it just reading it line by line?
He adds a little bit of commentary. Cool. I would be interested. I do have the physical copy of the book, and I've gone through that as well.
Yeah.
And this is like, we'll spin off to other things we'll talk about, but like there is, I think, an advantage. There are positive things about listening to an audiobook, especially if it's read by the author, where they add more like
emphasis and things on stuff.
And sometimes they go a little bit more, and they're like, you talking, and you're like, this isn't actually in the book,
right?
But he's leading us into the chapter,
right?
Either way, where it comes down to it, you're trying to diminish my accomplishment.
No, you didn't let me finish. You didn't let me finish the story, because the story is that since that conversation has happened, you've already like stepped your game up, and you've been in it more.
Yes,
and you're like being held accountable, and you're pushing, and I love it. I think it's amazing.
Oh,
and
thanks, man.
All I want to tell you is that if you're going to keep pushing and you're going to be the best you that you can be, I mean, Matt's setting the floor right now at 48. I'm going to set the bar a little bit higher at 60 this year. And if Matt starts going above and beyond 48, then I'm going to have to raise my goal too.
Yeah, we're gonna have to talk about budget because books cost money, bro. How many books? What kind of budget you got? You got a budget?
Let's
Is Kingdom and Power gonna buy me 100 books?
Let's let's talk about that after this.
Okay, cool.
Maybe we could make an investment. You know what I mean?
A love offering?
Yes,
Yeah,
exactly.
I like that.
But I think that this leads exactly in, and I would love for you to talk a little bit because I kind of have a question and kind of like what we're doing, but I do want to start it off with something first. Is that as we continue down the road of this show and this podcast and Kingdom Empowered and what we want to do, we want to continue to move into kind of other places of not just having me and Cory and a little bit of drummer Matt, but having guests on and having different things on. And through that, through whatever we talk about, through whoever the guest is, through anything, we would actually love to engage with you guys out there, whoever you are, if you're listening to our voices. You can literally, we're on every social media ever. I'm not going to spend a bunch of time on this, but Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, whatever you want. See, that was quick. You know what I mean? There's an email that you can email podcast@kingdomempowered.com where you can literally email in questions, email in something. And Joe or Matt actually had an idea of maybe we could do extra episodes or something that are just answering questions from
Q&As.
People out there who are listening.
Town hall kind of just
yeah.
chat. Yeah.
And I think that that's also a level of accountability that Matt is here to help us through. But also, we would love to engage with you out there. We want to talk with you. We want to answer your questions, all that kind of stuff. But
not even answer their questions too. It's be a
just
part of the
discuss
conversation.
them. Yeah, exactly.
It's we're not the people that have all the answers.
Exactly.
We're here to just flush out the conversation.
Yeah.
So when we say things like Kingdom Empowered exists to build a community, that's part of its what it is. That's a dialogue.
Right.
That's a back and
100%.
forth, not just between you and I or drummer Matt. It's with the people too.
Yes, absolutely. And so we're kind of playing around with this thing of where all three of us actually have either read or listened to, in Cory's case, a book very recently. And it's a book called What is the Bible by Rob Bell. Cory's already mentioned the title once.
Yeah.
But we almost kind of want to treat this book as a quasi guest on the show, right? Of kind of going through and talking about what the book says and kind of asking questions and kind of just talking about it. But I think what's really interesting is there's kind of this whole backstory of how we came to even find the book or hear about the book, which was an experience that you had.
Yeah. Because I think this will probably be the first thing that we talk about too that's a little bit loaded.
Yes.
Which I kind of love.
I love it. I'm all for it.
But my first experience with of honestly knowing who Rob Bell was, I didn't know anything about that name or who he was.
I read the book and still didn't know anything about him.
Was I think in 2017 ish. I'm not 100% sure when the book came out.
It was 2017.
Okay.
Drummer Matt, can you confirm?
He's typing now vigorously.
That's what he's here for.
And so I had the opportunity to go to Eastern PA to the Lancaster, Harrisburg area. And I was meeting up with my brother and two friends that we had gone to high school with. I hadn't seen these guys in probably 5 to 10 years, somewhere in that range. And at the time, we grew up, we were all going, believers, going to churches together, going to youth groups together, whatever. And we were going to go play golf, which we love.
Yeah.
And we were going to play Halo.
Right.
Which is a throwback to our past in 2004, LAN parties.
Right.
That vibe, the energy you
Yes.
catch when it's just red versus blue.
Yes.
4v4 team deathmatch.
Yes.
Let's go.
Let's go.
And so we have this night. I drove to Harrisburg and we hooked up our hardwired our Xboxes and TVs together. Had this thing, and then I went to the spare bedroom of my buddy Andy's house, and on the nightstand by the lamp, there was this book called What is the Bible. I think that it says how a collection of poems, letters, and stories has changed the world. Or I'm sorry, I'm butchering his title.
Drummer Matt.
And it's like 2 a.m. and I like see this book and I'm like, what the heck is this? Because at this time too, personally, I am coming out of an experience where I think I was kind of just like reevaluating the things I had grown up with, rethinking. And honestly, I was at a spot where it's like, I don't think I had a lot of personal connection with the text. And I was thinking about all the things like, how do we deal with like all this violence? How do we deal with all the contradictions? How do we deal with the fact, like, how does this relate to me now? And I immediately even saying that, like, have a spot in my, like, part of my head and it says like, you shouldn't even question that. But I was like in this spot, like, where it's like, I really don't even know how to approach the text. And I feel really vulnerable saying that, like, because it feels almost like sacrilegious, but like being honest, like I didn't know how to approach the text and really find life outside of maybe I picked and chose. I would say like the Gospels or certain things from Paul is like the grace message are like, these are really great, but like I didn't really know how to approach the Old Testament. And
by the way, I don't think you should feel bad about that at all. And I don't think anyone should feel bad about that because like think about this, like when someone new comes into faith, starts believing, right? And, every church ever is going to be like, oh, stop somewhere and we'll get you a free Bible, whatever, right? Like the number one question I get from people who are starting to believe in Jesus, like starting to believe what we believe, right? These things, this idea of Jesus, not this idea, but like their question is, where do I start? Like, do I start at page 1? Do I start in the New Testament? I don't know what the Bible is. And neither one of us are sitting here claiming to be an expert on the Bible. And so not knowing where to start, not knowing what that is, even like right here, right now, because I would say I don't either. I know certain things and I do certain things in a certain way, but that doesn't mean they're right. And I think that question is 1,000% valid.
So either way, and I also think there's something special, like the text is something I grew up with. And so like, no matter what, whether it's like a relationship, because relationships aren't always like just up and to the right, like this, like crescendo of great feelings. Like sometimes like there's ups and downs. And I think I was in a season where it's like, I don't really know how to, like, I love this thing and I've grown up with this thing that is the Bible, but I don't really know how to connect with it today and how to approach it. And so I saw that book. I was like, 2 a.m. I was like, I'm going to pick this up and I'm going to start reading it. And then this friend of mine comes in, peeks into the room, and just being transparent, like he's probably more on a fundamental side at that point of like the text. And he literally looks at me and says, that book is dangerous. Be careful. And I was just like, okay. And then I read for 2 or 3 hours. And now I'm at a point where I've listened to this book now 3 times. And it has brought me personally to a point where I approach the text with so much more love and excitement and like kind of like this opportunity is like maybe everything that I thought I knew about the Bible. Like my dad growing up used to always like say a statement, and I think people that are maybe older or a generation above us, they would say like, I learned a lot since I knew everything. In a way of being like, don't worry, you'll figure it out kind of like later. And I think that because of my background, because growing up of like reciting very specific passages, remember, that this reading What is the Bible by Rob Bell has allowed me to experience the text in a different way over the last 5 years, 6 years, that has like just kind of sparked something new in me that makes me like go to it for life and for revelation and for understanding. And it just provided a whole new context of how I can look at this text and how it is applicable to me today that I didn't have before. And I don't know. It reminded me of like the late 90s. My dad was in a Sam's Club and he walked through a bin of books. Do you remember like they would have I think Walmart still to this day has like bins of DVDs.
Really?
Yeah, I think so.
It's 2023.
Maybe not.
DVDs?
I think so, for like $5. Well, they did. Okay, let's take it back.
Okay.
You remember what I'm talking
Yes.
about. And it was a bin of books in Sam's Club of all the Harry Potter books.
Mm-hmm.
And he had a lady,
Mm-hmm.
there was like an older lady, come up and be like, be careful, that's witchcraft.
Mm-hmm.
And then my dad has his story. He used to tell us he bought all the books and read them, and like now is a huge Harry Potter fan and like loved them. I have not read a single Harry Potter book.
You just don't keep up with like culture at all.
No, that's not true.
Yeah. You
I
don't.
wear streetwear, bro.
I bought that sweatshirt for you and gave it to you and made it.
I wear Crocs.
It's not streetwear. It's housewear.
Oh, dude, it's today's streetwear. But anyway, I would just say like to get back to like the thing is like this book for me was a thing that like somebody pointed out. It's like that's dangerous, and I was like, why is that dangerous?
Yeah.
Because it might change the way I think.
Yeah.
The way I see something. It
Yeah.
might change. It maybe goes against some of like the narrative that like you've been told about this thing. Like this thing X equals Y, and this is the most important equation of all time.
Yeah.
And if somebody comes in and says, well, let's look at it differently, that can be viewed as like, that was viewed as, at least him. And he probably had a good heart in it.
Yeah.
He was looking out for me.
Yeah.
And probably in love said like, be careful with that.
Yeah.
There's dangerous ideas in that. But to me, it's like, that's exciting.
See, I think what's really interesting is you have been telling me to read this book for a while, and I just didn't. And then I finally did. And I thought it was great.
Yeah.
And basically I read it, and then I was texting like a bunch of people in group text, like individually, like, yo, go read this book. Like, it's awesome. And I didn't know who Rob Bell was. I didn't know anything. And so like, I was one of those people of like, even if maybe you're listening now and you're like, wait, why is the book dangerous? Like, who is Rob Bell? I've never heard of him before. So I'm going to give you just a quick breakdown and then I'll jump back in, right? But Rob Bell was the founding pastor of Mars Hill Bible Church in Michigan, okay? And I believe around like the 2010, 2011 mark, it was like the fastest or one of the fastest growing churches in America. And he had written a couple books before this. Velvet Elvis, I believe, is one of them, which is on my list to read.
I've listened to that.
You haven't read it. But in 2011, he came out with this book called Love Wins.
Yeah.
And it is, I will say 100%, it is a very challenging book in general. But I think it's because it gives you a lot of very interesting things that probably most likely go almost directly against what I've been taught and what a lot of people would say. And one of like the thing on Wikipedia that it says is that it talks about universal reconciliation. And you can go Google that. I'm not going to try to get into that right now because I don't feel comfortable doing that. But a couple months later, he stepped down from Mars Hill. He left, and now he tours, he writes, he speaks, he does a bunch of things. And what's really interesting is, and so that Love Wins book in 2011 kind of changed things and made Rob Bell into this character, like
To the evangelical church.
Correct. To the evangelical church, this character of danger, this character
Counterculture
of
kind of.
exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. And I didn't know any of that. Reading the book, going into the book, nobody told me it was a dangerous book. I knew none of it. And I actually texted Drummer Matt. Once again, we're going back to Drummer Matt. And I texted him, and I was like, "Bro, you should read this book. What is the Bible? It's by Rob Bell." And his response back was, "Is that the Mars Hill guy?"
And you're like, I don't know.
And I was like, honestly, the first thought in my head, which I'm not like, there's a whole bunch of stuff, but the first thought in my head was, there's no way that Mark Driscoll and Rob Bell were on like the same level, because Mark Driscoll's church, all of it was named Mars Hill too. And so I was like, Mars
It's like
Hill.
the First Church of Christ. You find one of them in every town.
Right.
This is the First Church of Christ.
Yes.
In Altoona. Oh my God. What?
So then I went and looked it up, and I saw this like controversy over Love Wins. So my immediate thought was
Buy one.
I went and bought Love Wins and I read it, right? But I think what's so cool about this to me is I think there are a lot of really interesting things in the book that we can get into, but I think the really interesting thing, kind of what you're saying of like you were told it's a dangerous book and that just kind of made you want to read it.
Yeah.
I love reading things that A, aren't from my perspective, and B, maybe don't have the same opinion that I do.
Mm-hmm.
Because that's how we learn.
Yeah.
And if I just stuck inside of like this very narrow vision of what I know to be true, and this is what I want to do, and this is what I'm focused on, and I don't ever want to go outside of that, then I don't like the way that path goes. Yeah. And I want to experience all these different things. And like a couple of books I've been reading lately have been talking a lot about like Buddhism. I'm reading this because the history of it and like the stories behind how it started and all these kinds of things are very interesting to me. I just want to learn. I just want to have a different perspective. And I think that helps me to even, and with these books, with the books that I've been reading that Rob Bell wrote, is I think that it's actually causing me to go way deeper in my faith.
Well, I think
moving me away from it.
I think there is something that's important, and actually, it's something that Rob talks about. I'm gonna call him Rob, if that's okay, Mr. Bell.
Mr. Bell. By the way, Mr. Bell, we'd love to have you on the podcast and ask you questions here. I'm not kidding.
If I could ever have a conversation with Rob Bell, it would be like I think it would be a.
I just want to ask questions.
Yeah, and yeah, so but it's this idea of like. We have like a preconceived notion of what a thing is. And so everything after that kind of gets like, we look at it through that filter. Mm-hmm. And so Rob talks about like even like stories in the Bible, especially if we've grown up, for people that have grown up in the Christian faith or in the church. We are told a very specific narrative about these passages, these stories, these poems, these letters, and this is what they mean, and that rightfully so holds a big place in our heart, right? Because we've used that to then guide decisions we've made, we continue to make, and to I guess like be in a position where it's like acknowledging that like letting the text, I guess, speak for itself, live on its own. Like he always says, like, go back to the Bible and to the words, and everything that we've heard, and it's not all bad or wrong, but has all come from hundreds of translators, through a lot of iterations, through a couple thousand years. And then that's taught down through a seminary school to a pastor who's now in your community and sitting in front of these 100 people and saying this interpretation of what the text is and what it means and what we need to walk away from it. I think even from a spot where you look at like, that's the Mars Hill guy. Yeah. Like there's a story that's been told about what he was doing was good and then some sort of like change and who he is now. Right. And we accept the story that's been told, that he's the Mars Hill guy. Right. And then for a lot of people, I think that we just like write off everything that he has and what he continues to produce and write and share and speak on. And I think that's like, that is detrimental.
It is.
Because we're taking a narrative from one perspective and then taking everything else he has to share. And clearly, if you read the book, go through it, he has invested he has such a reverence and a heart and knowledge of the text and the language. Like it's inspiring. Like I listen to and read that book and I'm just inspired to want to know more about the text because of the level in which he has invested into it. But you could just quickly write off everything. Like I'll never read a Rob Bell book or a Rob Bell book because he's the Mars Hill guy or Love Wins.
I think what's really interesting is what you're just talking about. Like what Rob Bell is a different interpretation of the Bible. That's all it is, right? And I think what's really interesting is I was thinking about this the other day of just kind of like, I was trying to think of people that I know who, like Amplify that we go to is a non-denominational church. And I was thinking, I know a lot. I have close friends who used to be Catholics.
Sure.
Right? Grew up Catholic. And I was sitting here going, this makes me want to go and have like deeper conversations with someone who who says or who, goes to a church that is Lutheran, Methodist, Presbyterian, Catholic, everything. And in everywhere in between, and just talk to them.
Yeah.
And like you go down this Google trail, this Google rabbit hole of like, what's the difference, right, of these denominations? And the problem is that very, very, very quickly, you just get to sites where basically my denomination is right and all of these other ones are wrong. Mm-hmm. And you like it's very, very quick and very, very easy to get to that rather than like, hey, let's talk about it. Like, let's understand it. Let's have this perspective. And that's what this entire podcast is and is going to be and will continue to be is we want to have conversations with everyone, regardless of where they're at. And I just want to ask questions because I truly believe, I won't speak for you, but I truly believe that's something the world is missing right now. And I also truly believe that's something that Jesus did and would do if he was here present on the earth right now. Of let's understand, let's gain a perspective, let's gain an understanding, let's seek this out from people who look different than us, that have different histories than us, that came from different places than we did. Let's learn about it, let's understand it, and then let's see where we meet and let's go from there, right? And I really, really enjoyed reading the book. I think to just like jump in of one of the things that I enjoyed about the book.
Like what hit you?
I think it gave me a different perspective on the Old Testament, like in general. I think that particularly over the last couple of years, I've spent a lot of time going through the New Testament, as a lot of people do, and that's fine.
Sure.
And I think that, a lot of times studying Jesus and his time on earth and Paul and Peter and Acts and Luke, like all of these different things. And I think what's really cool is that he talks about the New Testament or the Old Testament, I'm sorry, but also does it in a way where he doesn't shy away from topics that a lot of people, a lot of pastors, a lot of authors won't touch. Violence. Why was there so much killing in the Old Testament? Right? He talks about these things. And it truly is just a context thing. And I think I had this realization almost of where, I love looking up context of things. And we've had discussions like I love going and looking up like of Paul's missionary journeys, of the years that he was there and when he wrote each book. Because I think that if you read them as a whole, read these like as they go together, right? Then that has an impact of like Paul writes Romans but hasn't experienced X, Y, and Z yet. And so does that play into it? Does it not play into it? How does it work, right? And I think what I wasn't doing when I would go back and read the Old Testament is really evaluate that historical context of what that world was like, because it was 1,000 years before, like hundreds of 1,000 years before Paul, before Jesus, before any of them, depending on where you're at in the Old Testament, right? But it's just this thing of like, oh wait, there's a whole different context to the New Testament and the Old Testament, because pieces of it and parts of it are so far apart from each other.
And there's I think when I think about like what did I walk away from, like what hit me as soon as I started getting into the text, and it was like this line he keeps coming back to. It's like the filter of remembering that these are poems, stories, letters that were written by real people in a real time and with a real like circumstance, situation, political climate, and if we use that lens when we look at the stories of Noah's Ark, of Abraham. We look at the stories of David, because there's even like that's where even like the some of the, I guess, discrepancies between some of the stories in the Old Testament of like, and in the New Testament, like, but like thinking about the fact is like these are real people writing, and like what is the goal?
Right.
Like it is and people were making choices. What's included? What's not? Over hundreds of years.
Right.
So there's so much that like so many people decided this story needs
Right.
to be in this collection, in this library. And then if we come to it from the perspective of like, well, why did they choose this?
Mm-hmm.
And were they led by the Holy Spirit, by God to do this?
Mm-hmm.
Sure.
Yep.
Believe that. But there was a specific reason in calling. It's like, I need this story to be told because it's going to impact my generation and another generation. I want them to know this. I want them to remember that our God is different. And I think, I don't know if you're okay, we can jump into this. One of the things I think is cool that Rob Bell talks about is like the fact that like in the Bible, this God is different than other gods. And he is raising up a new tribe, a new people that is different, is set apart, is holy in a way than the stories that would have been common
Correct.
in that time.
Right. In other
how about that?
religions.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think that gives me a lot of grace when I approach the text, specifically in the Old Testament now.
Yeah.
And it keeps me out of this idea of like, when we start having the conversation, I think anybody that questions anything about the Bible, you immediately fall into like this conversation, or people want to pull you into, you're not falling into it, they'll drag you into it, of literalism.
Yeah.
And it's almost, it's like throw the baby out with the bathwater. If it's not all true, flaps to maps,
Yep.
then you can't claim any of it as faith, and you can't own any of it. And I think he did an amazing job of kind of providing context that this is by real people, written by real people in a real time in a real space.
Yeah.
That has allowed me to, I guess, have more peace.
Yeah.
And also find it like, because it's not even the story that's being told. It's like, what did God through these people want us to learn about him that was different than what the people of that time knew about him?
And Matt, I might need some help here, but one of the biggest things that I remember is him talking about Jonah.
Yeah.
Right? Story of Jonah.
Mm-hmm.
And it goes back to this literalism thing of where there are a lot of people who argue and will go back and forth on, was it a giant fish?
Mm-hmm.
Was it a whale? It's not what the Bible says, but was it a whale?
Right.
Was it a fish at all? Was this just symbolic? Like, what was it? Literally, a giant fish came up and swallowed him, and then he stayed inside for 3 days. Like, that's and not only is there like that argument discussion thing happening, but there are people on both sides who are arguing that the other person's wrong. Right? Of no, it has to be a giant fish. No, it doesn't have to be. And I think the amazing thing is what you're talking about, is what Rob Bell writes in the book, is that whether it's a big fish, whether it's a whale, whether it wasn't, none of it matters.
Right.
That was not the point of the story.
Yeah.
The point of the story at the end of it was actually that Jonah had gone to Nineveh, which was Assyrians, I believe. Is that correct? I believe it was Assyrian, I believe.
It was one of the people.
Yes,
that were like
one of the people that were the worst of the worst. No one liked them. They were violent.
racist to
Yes,
Assyrians.
they were terrible people according to like from where Jonah sat, right? And really what it was is that Jonah didn't want to go to Nineveh because he didn't want to go be around those people.
Yeah.
And then the whole story, he runs away, gets on the ship,
And he
goes
didn't.
off the ship.
And he was like, didn't he say like, he's like, God, I know what you'll do if you're there.
Right.
You're gonna be good.
Right.
You're gonna be just like. And he's
Yeah.
like, they don't deserve it.
Right. And whole thing happens, gets to Nineveh at the end, preaches, talks about God. And basically everyone there is like, oh my God, we love
The
him.
gospel works.
Oh my
The good-
gosh.
Yeah.
God is amazing. Like that's what the takeaway
or
was.
the takeaway was like, this God is different than any God we've ever heard of.
Yes. And it's like this piece of, I think, this lesson, this story of even somebody who you feel like is too far away, the gospel can speak to.
Yeah.
Even somebody that you have a terrible history with, they're not too far away
And God loves them.
for the gospel, and God loves them.
Yeah.
Right? And so many people he writes about miss that whole thing because we're worried about, was it a big fish? Was it not?
Yeah.
What's literal, what's not?
So he brings this up throughout the book, and I just love it. It's like every time he like brings up a passage, and he's like, he basically would like say, he's like, if you read this passage and you came up from the church, or you've like spent a lot of time in religion, you're probably going X, Y, Z. And he would always say, you're asking the wrong question. And I was like, yes. When we get into the conversation of, was it a big fish? Was it a whale? Or was the whole earth covered in water? Was it a talking snake? Was it not? It's like, we're asking the wrong questions. And if we start arguing about it, like generally, I think that we're the two people in that conversation, like it's unhealthy if we're both just trying to be right and convince you to see it my way.
Right.
Like a conversation, a dialogue is I think only healthy when we're both like willing to listen at some point.
Yeah.
And I feel like so often we hold on to these things that we have been told and taught by pastors, by priests, by small group leaders, etc. Like we often hear those stories at a very influential time in our life, like when we're growing up, and we hold on to those truths because our whole identity is wrapped up in, no, my understanding of this has to be, this is the truth. And if I let go of this, then who am I anymore? And it's pride.
Right. It 100% is. And but I think that it's also this thing of where the world, for as long, I mean, you're taught this in school, of like you need to be right. Like you need to pass your tests. You need to score 100s. You need to be right. You're taught to be right in everything. Yeah. And just to learn something the way that it is and basically not question it. We're not supposed to question our textbooks. We're not supposed to question these things, right?
Can I just interject real quick?
Go
but
for
the thing that we're learning something, they say the way that it is not the way that it is. It's the way that it's already been interpreted for you.
Yes.
Like that history, but how many times do we have to revise history books in our country or go through it? Like, it's like that was at the time, this was the understanding of the story, or this was the version of the story we want more people to have. Right. So we say, well, this is the way it is. You need to take it. It's like, well, that's not necessarily the way it was or is. It's like that was your interpretation of it.
One of the big things that I think is really interesting too, one of the kind of key points, I guess, that he talks about, I don't know if it's a key point, but he talks about the differences in the accounts around Jesus' resurrection, of who was at the tomb, who found Jesus, who saw Jesus first, the angels on top of the rock, inside, like, and there are a lot of people out there who almost just discount like Christianity and Jesus, like the Bible as a whole, because just of that one contradiction. Like, how is this like the same, like the most important thing, like this happening to Jesus? How are you going to get this wrong and have different accounts of it and just discount everything about it? And it goes back to,
well, because a lot of those people weren't there,
right?
That wrote the thing, they weren't at the tomb, right?
But was
anybody that wrote a gospel actually at the tomb?
Which is another reason why people discount it.
And like it was written, like Luke never met Jesus.
Correct.
According, like, from my understanding of that.
He knew Peter and Paul. But I think what he goes into is that those errors, those contradictions.
Even that, what I just said there too, is like an example of like, I'm just trying to prove like it's okay. Like it's just like, who cares? What's the real point of what the resurrection means?
Correct. That's what matters.
Yeah.
But he goes in and he says that the fact that there are differences in the account is so powerful.
Yeah.
Because it goes back to real people living in a real time, a real place. Yeah. All of these things happen, right? And he kind of argued, or he kind of said, that this makes the Bible more true. Because he goes through this. I remember this part in the book.
Because if it was propaganda,
correct,
it would all.
He goes through this like list of questions of like, if you were trying to create like this perfect fake religion that you got people to believe in, and like maybe you made money off of, maybe you did whatever, then like you would make sure that in the most important story there were no errors. Yeah, nobody could say this was wrong, right? But the fact that there were slight differences because they were different people experiencing different things, all like at different times, that it makes sense. Because before the Bible, basically before it was kind of compiled, right? Basically everything was oral, and there were a couple of scrolls in the holy place, in
your town.
Right, in your town. Wherever that was, there were a couple of scrolls. Everything else was oral, right? And so it makes sense and matches historically and matches with context that there would be some contradictions from different people writing from different places. And it makes it more real.
Yeah.
And I love that.
Yeah.
I'd never heard anything. I think if I had ever asked a question about a contradiction like that, 99% of the time it was just like, we don't talk about that. Like that kind of answer. Like we're not going to
have that conversation.
We'll have that conversation later, which really means never.
Yeah. Or anytime I think I felt coming up like that, if I doubted scripture, that showed a lack of faith. And then that would ultimately, if you like zoom out, that takes you to the fact of like, well, how do you even like know you're standing with God if you lack faith in this area? But I loved how he talked too about like the idea of like what people's relationship was with the text at the time. Is they would go into the synagogue in this one place and they would have one scroll and it would be read to you, and then they would have a conversation.
Yes.
And they would wrestle with the text. Like that's, I think, and it's still a beautiful thing I think about Jewish culture and religion. How it is like they go in, like it's not considered a negative thing to come in here and have questions. Like you were those were table stakes.
Right.
Like you come in here, it's like coming in, like if we read a book for a small group or something, like you're expected to come in and question things and say, this is my experience.
Yes.
This is what I'm like, how do we read this? What does this mean? And then it's not one person necessarily that has an answer, but I think it's really it's a community of people flushing out what's going on. And then like, I think there's probably always like, in any healthy community too, there's like people that are elders, people that have wisdom or different understanding, and they're like helping to guide you through a better understanding of what the text means and how it can be applicable to your life.
Right. So like, let's just pause for a second and let's just like literally picture what you're talking about right now, because church would be you go to a room and the pastor, the person in charge, reads a scroll, and then everyone is just debating about it, discussing it. This is what I think. This is what I think.
Yeah,
that's the picture, right?
Yeah, I would imagine there had to be some sort of structure,
right? Some kind of moderation.
Well, they also makes a good point of too in the old like in that context too, like what they described as lawyers were actually scholars of the text,
right?
And so like you had to like, so if it was like you think about, was their service almost like a courtroom of people arguing, debating? You had people on both sides that were scholars of the text going back.
I want to do more research on that. Like I want to know that, or understand more about that time and that context. But like, think about like the picture that I'm picturing in my head right now is like, think about if that's what it was today, right? Of if you walked into a church, and let's just go back for a second to the Jonah story, right? Of you go into church and it's only 4 chapters long. Somebody stands up on stage and takes 20 minutes to just read you the 4 chapters in the book of Jonah, right? And then you discuss it. This is what I took from that. This is what I took from that. And this is like, and like, I'm never putting anybody down. I don't ever want it to be like that. But like, the thing that I'm thinking about right now is like, how fast would that conversation get to? Was it a literal big fish or was it not?
Oh, I think it's very fast.
And not get to God loves them.
Yeah.
No one's too far away for God to love them. You can go out and you can make this impact. Like how, like, and it's crazy to me to think about that. And I think that's part of like even what has spurred this podcast as we've gone along of like, you know, we're talking about all these things and we're talking about these things from Rob Bell book. And you know what? There could be somebody out there who hears us right now and we're talking to, and they're like, I completely disagree. And my like response to that is like, cool.
Sure.
Like, great. Like, I want to know, I would love to know why. And have like a civil conversation about it. like email us, like reach out to us. Like I would love to know. I think it would be really cool to talk about that. And right now I'm just kind of in this like discovery side topic for just a second. There's a documentary on Rob Bell. I on like Apple, Amazon, it's like $3 or $4. It's called The Heretic. Okay. And you told me about it. And I was like, I went into it with a very negative connotation, which is not at all what it is.
Yeah.
Like he was a part of this. Like he knew it was being filmed.
Yeah.
But I went into it thinking that it was going to be this documentary made by people who were calling him a heretic, bashing him.
Yeah.
And really the name The Heretic came from people go and protest at places where he speaks now. People wait in line to get into whatever the venue is, and they will go and protest these. And somebody said, if you go and you're listening to a heretic, and they got it on film and they put it in there.
Yeah.
That's where the name comes from. But like I watched that, and he brought up, it was done right around what is the Bible, and it covers a lot of the same things. And another piece of context about the Bible that I pulled out of this book. Is it okay?
Yeah, go.
You're
Doing great.
Another piece of context that I pulled out of what is the Bible was this kind of overarching context of the writers of the Bible, right? So we've gone over like real people, real place, real time, real experiences that they went through that then were put into what is the Bible, right? One of the things that he talks about was a big portion of the Bible, maybe all of it, I really honestly couldn't tell you, was written by Jewish people, right? And yeah, Matt, can you answer that? Were there books, all of them had to have been Jews, or I guess I don't know.
Definitely the Old Testament.
Right. Yes, for sure. But it was this thing of where the Jewish people in these times, in like what we call biblical times, which I think is really funny because that really actually covers like 1,500 years, like a really long time, like longer.
Maybe more.
No, a lot more than that, like a lot of years. But he talks about how during this time, the Jewish people were an incredibly oppressed
100%,
people.
Yeah. Conquered over and over again.
Over and over. The Babylonians, the Assyrians, the Romans, just over and over. Over and over and over again. They were just beat down. And they were oppressed, and they were slaves, and they were pushed aside. All of these different things, right? And think about that in context of the people who wrote the Bible. Real people, real place, right? They were a part of a group of people who had been oppressed for hundreds and hundreds of years, and they were also a minority in the day and age that they lived in, right? And so I think that this was really kind of eye-opening for me as well, just because I am a white male who lives in America.
Yeah.
And I have never had an experience where, like, I was oppressed, I was the minority. Like, I've never experienced that. I don't have that perspective. But to figure out that, to have this context overall of the Bible of the people who were writing this were oppressed. And so there are a lot of things that the men and women who wrote the Bible, like, they would look at today in a very, very, very different way because they were oppressed. They were a minority. They I just thought it was so interesting of having these kind of filters and these kind of things to look at the Bible at.
Yeah. I think something that is cool to me and I walk away from after reading this book is specifically the time and place when I first read it. And I think I had a lens where I was viewing the Bible as like somewhat like archaic, old-fashioned, about a lot of like old ways of looking that, like, I don't know if they apply to our culture, our time. It seems like dehumanizing in some ways. How is this thing like? I mean, there's a lot, but he provides a way of looking at it and a lens to look through these stories where you see the God of Israel as revolutionary.
Yeah.
And it's not archaic, and like it's different. And if you, I think not to go down a huge rabbit hole of like literalism, but to go circle back to the story of Abraham and his son. And he kind of has a moment, I think, now we'll not do this fully accurately, but like he talks about like in ancient times, the gods control things that
people believe that the gods control
things that we can't see, or like
rain, yes,
sunlight. We need these things to grow. If we have too much rain, it washes stuff away. We don't have enough rain, nothing grows.
Yes.
And so if the gods are happy with you, which also all ancient gods seem to be very fickle and temperamental little pricks.
Yeah.
In all honesty.
Yeah.
So if like the gods are happy with you, you get this, blah, blah, and then you give us the natural response is like, well, we need to keep them happy.
Right.
And then he talks about like if you took that the whole way, as far as it can go, because like we have to keep the gods healthy or happy because we need to keep having the rain, the sun. As far as you go, it would be like a natural conclusion. The thing that matters most to you, which will eventually point to Jesus, is the idea of like you have to sacrifice a child.
Right.
And for me, in 2020 ish or whatever, reading that story, I'm like
2020-ish.
I'm saying in this area. I was thinking like 21st century.
Okay.
21st
Do you not know
century.
what year it is? What are you doing?
Well, I was in between of what today is 2023,
Yeah.
and when I read the book 2017, it was like,
right.
but it's like that seems like absolutely ridiculous. It seems like he even talks about it in the book. It's like it would be crazy, like that. Like he tells a story of like a pastor like telling him that he took this pastor took his son out and told him the story of Abraham and was like, I want you to know that like you will never mean as much to me as God. Yeah. Or I will never like that's where my number one thing is. And like in a sense it's like okay, but like also it's like dude, you're just being a jerk. Yeah. That's just like how could you have a son? 2 sons. I have a daughter. Like I am like the idea of a God that would ask me to sacrifice my child to show something. That seems crazy in today's day and age. But if we have a different lens, a different context, and we look to a different time, that story would not have been that jarring. Right. Because every ancient culture that had identified a God, a lot of them had like child sacrifice was just where you went because that was the most valuable thing you could give. Right. So the revolutionary part about this, like in the meat of the story is like not necessarily, is it possible that that's the heart of that story is not Abraham's great faith to God, that he would actually kill his son, but his trust in a God that was different, that would not ask you to sacrifice your child, a God that provides a sacrifice, and that Abraham even knew it before he went into the mountain. Right. He says, the boy and I will come back after we worship. And even like that is just, that would have been a story that if you listened to it that time and place, you'd be like, what is this God? Yeah. This God of Israel that is different, this God of Abraham that is different, that doesn't require that, but provides a sacrifice so that you can live. Yeah. Like when I think like that takes that story, elevates it to such a new and like inspiring spot for me.
I think what's wild is I totally agree with you of like this. There's just another level, right, of like that story. Yeah. And I think what was crazy is like it took me until probably 3 or 4 years ago, just being real, to like finally understand the like parallel of that story and Jesus coming. Like literally like 3 or 4 years ago to like, oh wait. Yeah. God did this, didn't make Abraham do it, willing to do what we didn't have to, like all of these things. And so then to just take, I think it's just another level. And like another story that he talks about is how basically every religion has story of the flood. Yep. Everyone, right? But our God, right?
This God is different.
This God is different. And after, never going to do it again. Yeah. Right? And that's not present in other, like, I love where you went with like just God is different. Right? And I just think that he also talks about like weird things in the book. Like he starts the book off talking about Moses and his I don't know, what are we supposed to talk about? How are you supposed to describe that on the podcast? Do you just say it as it is?
Yeah.
Like basically his vigor is what it talks about in the Bible. This is how it starts.
What's the chapter called? Is wet and
Matt, just talk. Matt, you have a mic for a reason.
I believe it says Moses' moisture.
Yes.
is moisture.
It's like literally the very first chapter.
Yeah.
But he starts breaking this down.
Moses and his moisture.
Yes. But it starts saying, and it's basically that this word, when Moses died, right?
Yeah.
Basically meant that he could still have sex.
Mm-hmm.
Like, and what was the importance of that?
And, what did that mean?
And then talks about like 3 more weird things that all led up back to what the actual point of all of it was. And it goes back to what you're saying of like, the reason why I'm thinking about this is because one of the things that he says, and I think you may have said a little bit about this earlier, but like if something's in the Bible, it's there for a reason, right?
Mm-hmm.
And how much of the Bible have I like glazed over or skimmed over
or discounted
that
doesn't apply to me anymore,
or not paid attention to because it was something that I didn't know, I didn't understand, I'd never been taught about. I had been taught about it. I mean, he talks about, I believe, he's talking about like the festival with the water. Do you remember that story? And I was like, what? I want to look this up and all the different days and all the festivals and
why it had meaning, why Jesus came at a certain time.
Yes.
I feel like we could probably do episodes on every chapter of this book.
Right.
Because there is
like
a lot
breaking
in every one to go through, because I don't want to misspeak about that. But like it was, I remember being struck by the fact of like, he was through that feast.
Yes.
That there were decisions that were being made specifically based on how people would feel at that time.
Yes.
There was a point where it was like, I think because it was not that probably dissimilar than like, what we would think of like Woodstock or Burning Man, where it's like people like, it was common that it would be like drink and they would be like share tents together. And that, it was the woman that's pulled out in like when he draws in the sand.
Oh, yes.
The adulterer.
Yes.
Like she is pulled out in the middle of a festival where it was probably common that people were
yes, and
drinking and sharing tents.
Yes, and then he talked about how that just writing in the dust was what meant something because the festival were where they had been thinking for water. Like it was about water.
Yeah.
And then writing in the dust, which was the opposite of water. Like it had this whole thing.
We got to go back and have that conversation. Like I want to go deeper into that.
Wild. And here's what I would say is like, if anybody, I don't even know how long we've been going, but if anybody out there is listening to my voice right now, I always like doing this, like as we kind of get to the end of like, if you're still listening, like I would recommend the book.
Oh yeah.
100%. And here's the crazy thing. And I love saying this, right? Is that it doesn't mean that you have to agree with everything in the book. And it doesn't mean that you have to be like, oh, I'm going to change what I have been taught before, or change my faith, or change some belief that I have, right? It's literally go read the book for a different viewpoint. And that is actually how he opens up the book.
Yeah.
Is that it may be in the foreword, it may be in the introduction, but he opens up the book saying he had been preaching, he had been doing this, and then he had a friend come to him and be like, do you actually know what this means?
Yeah. He talked about the opportunity when he was, I think he was in seminary, and he was like in like the early 90s, and he's like throwing himself into like the craft of giving a sermon. And he talks about, he's like, I'm going to do a different way. I'm going to just like this kind of new thing. And I think he talked about his professor kind of being like, you can go further. Like it wasn't even about, it was just saying like, go. So I think if you read this book and it is challenging and you don't agree with everything, that's okay. And this is, I don't think that Rob's, I know his goal is not to convert you to see things the way he sees it necessarily. But what he's trying to get us to do is to engage with the Word of God. This be curious, go through it and have and open up a door. It's an invitation for us to experience it differently. And ultimately, I believe like really like discover more. Whether you discover this, like that's not this this certain interpretation is not for me right here, right now.
Right.
I don't feel comfortable. Like I want to say,
You
that's
learn
okay.
from that, though.
That's okay.
Learning what you believe is almost just as important as learning what you don't.
Mm-hmm.
And I will.
He is a great because he keeps coming back, and when you hear him read the book too, it's great because it's like in just Rob's voice.
Yeah.
He's like, once you've tasted, you can't untaste, and once you see, you can't unsee. And I think that this, anybody that it goes into this with just with curiosity, like a child, just to just put aside maybe some of the things that we've grown up with and the stories that. Be able to read the story of Abraham, be able to read the story of the Garden of Eden, be able to read the stories of Paul or anything, like in a way where it's like I can put aside what I think I know to just be open to a different context.
Yep.
And I think that if anybody does that, I think at the very least they walk away with an experience where they at least see a new way to approach the text, whether they do it or not. And I think it just adds value to the way you approach the text.
Just as one of the things he does in the book is he also explains why the genealogy lists are important.
Oh, so good, yeah. Because that's so boring to read.
I don't think I've actually ever read through them 100%.
Matt probably has. Drummer Matt, have
definitely
you done it?
has.
I have not.
Oh, okay.
Not surprised.
Well,
I knew it.
Yeah. No, but I think I don't know why I'm coming to this, but been around church for several years now, and I've served in a high level at different churches or at Amplify, right, that we're going to now. And I think what's really interesting is over the years, I've seen people come, I've seen people go, I've seen, all of these different things just at church. And not just for our church, but for other churches. When I talk to people who are leaving churches and they're going to find something else, I think one of the biggest things that I hear people say is, I wish that church went deeper. Not just about whatever church it is, but I wish that church went deeper. I wish I got more out of that, right? And I could spend a lot of time talking about this. A lot of time talking about this, but I will just summarize it all by saying how you go deeper is reading books like this. This is how you go deeper, of learning about things, learning about different pieces of context that, you were born Christian, essentially. With your dad, the family you grew up, you've been in the Word since you were a very, very, very small child. And he's talking about these,
and he gives me fresh eyes.
Right. He's talking about things in this book that you haven't really, you haven't
never
seen, thought about before, right? And so, this is how you go deeper, is a book like this. It's not the only way. There are a lot of ways, but a book like this that takes you deeper, that makes you question, that makes you have this just curiosity. Being curious is so much fun.
Yeah.
It's so much fun.
I think it's that's how you're made. Lose curiosity and see what kind of human being you are.
Boring.
Yeah, it's not.
You're like Drummer Matt.
Just uses the internet to find out if he was right.
Right.
You gotta stand on a line.
Right.
Put yourself out there a little bit, Matt.
No, but even think about our kids.
Yeah.
I think about my son, and my oldest son, and all he does is ask why. Just, and it's the thing that you make fun of, and the thing that it can be not so great all the time. I had to word that one correctly, right? But when you really take a step back, and look at what he's doing, he's shaping his entire life. He's shaping his informational foundation forever.
Yeah, and he's learning. He approaches a circumstance, and something happens, and if he says why, well, how we respond to that is very formative, because we could tell him it's X, Y, and Z, and these things are happening. And if we just say don't worry about it, it's throughout life things are going to happen, and sometimes we can look at asking why, start with why. It's a really healthy way to go, and don't just assume everything is the way it's given to you.
Right.
And I don't think our God is so insecure about his son or about the truth that he's worried about Cory asking why about like I it happens every time we talk for more than an hour. I get a little froggy.
Right.
That like I don't think he's like worried about me. Like this is the story you've heard since you were a boy, and that's not a bad thing.
Right.
But now that I'm asking why, it's like, well, did all that mean nothing?
Right. Right.
No, I think you look at like, man, he's like, I think the heart of God, like a father, would be like, I'm so glad you asked.
Mm-hmm.
It's
Yeah.
so cool you're interested in this.
And
I don't. And the way I look, I don't know all the answers, but we can find out. Let's try some stuff.
Right. And
go.
I think what's also cool of like going back to like the kid example of like exactly what you're talking about of like my son he'll be like, what day is today? Oh, it's Monday. What's tomorrow? You know what tomorrow is. It's Tuesday. Why is it Tuesday tomorrow? What? Well, like my answer is like I say, well, that's how God made it. Really, that's how the Romans made it. but like then we'd go into what did the Romans say? A whole.
That's
long
too much
story.
to tell a
Like
3-year-old.
right. But there's this thing of like he even questions like, well, why is it nighttime?
Yeah.
Why did the sun go down? Why is it Tuesday today? Why is it Wednesday tomorrow? And I relate this back to things that like you or I could have known our whole lives. And it doesn't mean we shouldn't ask why.
Yeah.
It doesn't mean we shouldn't go deeper. It doesn't mean we shouldn't look into that. I think what's crazy is I was talking with somebody on the phone earlier today. And she told me this insane story that I actually am working on a book, and I asked her if she would be willing to put that make that story the forward of the book. Because it's absolutely insane, and it's not my place to share that story. One day she will, publicly. But one of the big things that the story ended with was to not ever just accept what a pastor says, what an author, Rob Bell, says, what your friend says, what your whoever says and tells you to go and do. Trust in what Jesus is telling you what to do. Trust in what God is telling you to do.
Yeah, the nature of God.
Correct.
You know what that is. Yeah.
Correct. And I think it was really powerful because she talks about a moment where she did not show love like she should have. And she recognizes this now, right? And it was this incredible thing of where everyone around her was telling her to do something that was not based in love. And everyone around her were pastors, Christians. And I mean, like, they just were doing what they thought was best. And I'm getting this because it's still, even to this of like, if you're, I don't think they would, hopefully you're still listening. But if you were like, oh, I'm not going to read that book because it's Rob Bell. Like, do it anyway. Like, it's a personal challenge from Taylor to you. Like, go and do it anyway, because I'm telling you, there's something special about just asking why. There's something special about being curious. There's something special about learning more, and I feel closer to God after reading the book than I did before.
Amen.
And I think for me, that's all that matters.
Yeah, man. That's awesome. Man, I feel like we just touched the surface. I hope people go read the book.
Very high level.
Man, I love
The
it.
book gets really deep really quick,
Yeah.
though.
Well, that's a conversation for another day.
Right.
But man, I would just say thank you to Rob Bell. Like, 'cause that was it's been an amazing part of my life.
Yeah.
Maybe someday we'll get to talk to him, or he'll think this is cool too. But we think your stuff is cool.
Yeah. I have a lot of questions for you.
Yeah.
That it would be awesome to sit down and it would be cool.
Come to Pennsylvania.
Yeah, we're here.
But this is good, man.
Yeah.
That was cool. That's like our first guest, but it was a book
Right.
and an author.
Right.
And topic.
And like the guest had pre-answered all of our questions. And then we were
Yeah.
I don't know, we'll
I
work
see
on
where
it.
you're going with it, but
Yeah.
it's fun.
Love you, man.
Love you, man.
Well, before we wrap up, I'd like to provide some fun facts from throughout the episode. I've been keeping track. I'd love to share some input.
Who won? Did I win?
We got to start.
Corey
We
win?
got to throw it to drummer Matt.
I wasn't
before
keeping score, but moving forward, we will keep a tally of,
Okay, cool. Thanks.
of rights and wrongs.
Yeah, thank you.
So as a
The law.
supplementary quote from another Rob Bell book, this one is, what do we talk about when we talk about God? Kind of touches on what you talked about before. For many people in our world, the opposite of faith is doubt. The goal then within this understanding is to eliminate doubt. But faith and doubt aren't opposites. Doubt is often a sign that your faith has a pulse that is alive and well and exploring and searching. Faith and doubt aren't opposites. They are, as it turns out, excellent dance partners.
Ooh. Dude, the dance we're doing a little
weird.
salsa in
Salsa,
there.
babe.
Ugh.
Additionally, so for anybody looking to check out the book,
Additionally,
the
you're being so
full
professional, dude.
title of the
this.
book, released in May of 2017, point to Cory, is What is the
I'm
Bible?
the one who said it was in 2017.
I gave the point to Cory.
That's when drummer Max speaks. We don't. We have to listen to the facts.
The full title is What is the Bible? How an ancient library of poems, letters, and stories can transform the way you think and feel about everything.
Negative points from Corey.
DVDs and Blu-rays. In 2021, total sales of 1.97 billion.
In 2021?
In 2021,
Yeah, buddy.
the crazier stat, rentals, a total of $822 million. Both were down 20% though from 2020.
So the Blockbuster's closed.
Touching on the
Thanks,
book of
Coach.
Jonah. So Jonah says, the Lord had prepared a great fish to swallow up Jonah, and Jonah was in the belly of the fish 3 days and 3 nights. The controversy comes in Matthew 12:39-41, where in the King James Version, Jesus refers to Jonah as being in 3 days and 3 nights in the whale's belly. The common pushback is on that dictation of whale versus large fish. The underlying Greek word that is translated as whale in the KJV is it was the word ketos, Ketos, and is defined broadly as a large sea creature or sea monster or huge fish. Jesus indicated that Jonah was swallowed by a large sea creature, which was not necessarily a whale, but may have been. And then the final fact, in 321 AD, Emperor Constantine established the 7-day week in the Roman calendar and designated Sunday as the first day of the week.
Can you give a point to Taylor for knowing it was the Romans?
No. Half.
Honorable mention. Well, thanks, Matt.
Negative 50 points to drummer Matt for
Yeah.
not giving me any points. But guess what?
It's not about winning and losing. It's about flowing together. So, Matt, we love you, man. Thanks for being a part of this.
You were okay.
Thank you.
Nope, we love him.
I mean, I didn't disagree with it.
Just because he had pointed out a couple of things that you got wrong
No,
doesn't mean
he didn't point out anything that I got wrong.
Oh, there were things.
Like what?
I don't know. I lost it.
Love you, man.
Love you too.
Love you, everyone.